Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Endless Party. We're so glad you are here with us. And so, we're actually just going to jump right in
A little story.
with a little story. So, there's this in India, in back far east, there's a bunch of villages that honestly believe that the shadow of a man or woman cast has an effect on their lives. So, for example, when an outcast would come in or somebody they view as a sinner, their shadow would fall across their food. They would literally throw their food away. But these same people believed that the shadow of somebody like Gandhi or somebody of high prestige had an influence over them too. So they would maneuver themselves to literally fall in the shadow of these great men and women. And so that's what we're actually wanting to talk about today is how each and every one of us actually casts a shadow for good or for evil.
Something that, that story reminds me of is actually the woman we read of in the Bible who all she wanted to do was touch the robe of the Savior.
Oh yeah,
I,
that's a
I
good
feel like
example.
it's kind of similar.
Yeah, no,
No,
absolutely.
like whereas, the people in India wanted to touch the shadow, I think that kind of helps explain the story where she believed so wholeheartedly in like the virtue and just the power of the healing power of Christ that she thought, oh, if I just touch
Even
his
his
robe,
garment,
if
yeah.
I just touch his garment, something that's just associated with him, then I will be healed. And it was the woman who had the issue of blood.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, that's what that
No,
reminded me of.
absolutely. That's exactly what we're even talking about. And what's kind of cool is you can even look back to the great men and women throughout history and see the type of shadow that they cast. And of course, as Christians, the greatest shadow that was ever cast was Christ's. Because you can look at the influence that he has had since the beginning of time, since his birth to his death, even before his birth. And so that's what we want to talk about is how each and every one of us can really just shape and mold our lives to cast shadows that are meaningful, that are powerful, that have value to them. There was actually a story I'll share with you too, real quick. There was a woman that was just going off with hateful and cruel speech toward a well known political figure. And all of a sudden, she comes to a halt as another woman walked into the room. And she just kind of sat there for a minute. And then she looks at all of these friends that she was talking to about this politician or this political leader. And she goes, well, how can you say hateful things when Jane Addams is in the room?
That's so beautiful.
And what's pretty cool about that is that that's the effect that each of us can have on others. Jane Addams was such an influential person that this woman could not even speak ill in her presence. And so I guess the question is, how can we become those people? How can we become the type of people that when we enter a room, people immediately stop speaking ill, they stop having cruel thoughts, they stop, in a sense, just being cruel.
Yeah, I kind of like to think of our shadows as like our influence. I think, physically it's easier to imagine a shadow, but like, in a more mental or I don't know, whatever way, spiritual way, it's kind of like our influence. What kind of influence do we cast on others? And are we
Yeah.
that person? What's interesting too is we all know those people who step into a room and the room is somehow brighter.
Mm-hmm.
It physically feels brighter just because of their presence. And in
Yeah.
contrast, we also know those people who step into a room and the room feels darker,
Who the room brightens up
gloomier.
as soon as they leave.
Yes, it brightens. Yes.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. And I guess that's what we really want to strive to help each and every one of you, as well as ourselves, to have that influence for good wherever we go. And the way that we can become that is obviously by small and simple means and by small and simple things. So, reading from the best books, just working on ourselves. But I think, especially coming from a Christian background, we can turn to the Savior. And as we've already iterated and reiterated, the Savior has cast the greatest shadow, so much so that a woman knew that even if she just touched something associated with the Savior, she would be healed. Because that's how much of an influence that he can have on each and every one of us. And what's astounding is that his shadow is so grand and so powerful that if we do turn to him, we too can be healed, just as the woman with the issue of blood.
just by believing in him and his influence.
Yeah.
I wanted to jump in and share a story, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so every Sunday growing up, we had like this family routine. So we would go to church as kids, and then we would come home, and my parents would take a nap, or really what would happen is it was their time to just hang out or whatever. And so all of us kids would go into the basement or the family room, and we had a specific set of like these uplifting films that we could watch. You know, my parents had like designated, hey, these are good films for you to watch on Sunday. That was just kind of my family's routine.
Yeah.
Like, that's just like something we did. Anyways, so one of these movies was the story of Florence Nightingale.
Ooh.
And I remember so I don't know why. I'm the oldest, and then my second sister, she was always in charge of putting the tapes in the DVD player. And so there are a lot of stories about like men, really influential men, but of course like me and my sister really got into this story of this girl. I think just because we were girls, and it made the movie more girly. Yeah. I don't really know. Anyway, so for a while there, my sister put in this tape every week. So we listened and watched the story of Florence Nightingale every week, and it was like animated and super cool. Anyways, so growing up, I remember my mom crying at a certain part of this movie, and I'll get to it. So anyways, Florence Nightingale, so she was actually kind of cool because she kind of grew up in nobility. And it was in the 1800s, and at this time, nursing wasn't like a respected profession at all. It wasn't admirable. It was just kind of like, it wasn't like something that was, it just wasn't admirable or respected. Whereas today, it's a very respected profession, and that's honestly because of her. She kind of influenced the profession as such. Anyways, so Florence Nightingale was born of nobility, and what she did is she turned away a bunch of suitors, and instead of getting married, she kind of scandalized her family and said, I'm going to devote my life to being a nurse and taking care of soldiers. That's where I feel like my purpose is, so that's what I'm going to do. And so during the Crimean War, that's kind of when she got her start, and she banded together a group of women, and that's when she really started to influence hospitals. And she would go in, and these hospitals were just dark and dirty and bleak and unorganized and not well run. And she would come in, and she would just completely facelift it, and she brought in great care, and she would start to tend to these really injured soldiers coming back from war. And these soldiers started to call her the lady with the lamp. And it makes me kind of emotional because what they would remember is this woman would come in with the lamp, and she would be checking on them all through the night. And her shadow would be cast on the wall as she passed each bed. And it said, in this documentary, it said that the men would kiss her shadow as she walked past them because they were so thankful for the care that this woman gave them. And now that I'm a mom, I guess I cry too about it. That's the part my mom always cried at. And I just think it's so incredible what this woman did and what her influence did and how she changed the field of nursing, but just the light that she brought to these, into these men, like these soldiers' lives.
Absolutely. I mean, beautiful story.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What's pretty astounding is Meg mentioned this just now, and she goes, now that I'm a mother, I cry at that part as well. And I think that's one thing I wanted to make mention in this podcast episode is that the biggest influence that you will have on people's lives is your children. And I think your children can either thrive or disintegrate in your shadow. And it's all based on the shadow that you cast for them. I mean, I look at the most influential people in my life, and I can genuinely say one of the most influential people in my life has been my father. And he casts a big shadow. And it's not a big shadow in the sense that it's like large shoes to fill. It's a shadow in the sense that he is respected and revered as a very powerful and very successful individual. And that makes me want to do the same, wants me to have that same success. And what's interesting is we talked about this in one of our previous podcasts, the parenting party as well. And we talked about Mother's Day, and Meg mentioned like how grateful she is for her mom because of the influence that her mother had on her and how she can carefully and tenderly take care of her babies because she watched her mother do it. And that's really the shadow that we're talking about.
I kind of wanted to bring another thing
Yeah.
up. I think a lot of times, you know, living in someone's shadow is negative, but I don't think it has to be.
I don't think so either.
I don't think it has to be. I think kind of like you were explaining, like I think you can allow yourself to be influenced by amazing people. Like, and in a sense, I hope that our kids choose to live in our shadows in a sense that not that they're not being someone that they're not, but in a sense that they take the good things that they think we implement and they implement them in their own lives.
Yeah.
And I think as a mom too, you know, going back to Florence Nightingale, I hope that I think I get emotional because I go in and check on our babies every night before bed. And it just is so sweet to think that actually, like, you know, so I go in and check on them and the hallway light is on. And so what I'm doing, I'm casting a shadow, a literal shadow on my babies every night. And it's because I just care so deeply for them. And I hope that they, I don't know, one day will look back and realize that, you know, that is what I'm doing, you know?
Yeah, with fondness.
Yeah.
No, I agree. And, you know, this even goes not only into parenting, but this can go into every aspect of your life. I think one of the great examples is Stephen Covey. In the foreword of his book, his kids wrote the foreword of his book, I believe, and they talked about like they were asked like, okay, well, your father is this great individual outside of the home, but how is he inside of the home? And they said he's better inside of the home than he is outside of the home, and he was a phenomenal man outside of the home.
Yes.
And that's the type of influence that I hope to have on my kids, that I am great and a phenomenal person outside, but I am so much better of a person inside the home, because that's where it really matters. That's the greatest impact that you can have on this world, is by helping future generations of people become great and marvelous, much better than I ever could be, because hopefully I'll be able to teach them from my mistakes. And because of that, like Meg said, I don't think living in somebody's shadow has to be a negative thing. I think you can draw from all the good that they have, as well as even some of the bad, to learn from them and really just shape your life. One of the stories that I actually want to share with you is this also can happen from the top down in terms of a coaching and athletic setting. And so I first attended Boise State University, is where I signed with right out of high school. And my freshman year was okay there. I did really well and didn't have too much grief or problems. And then my sophomore year, it was like a totally different dynamic. Everything was just mediocre. Everything was, I'm trying to think of the right word, just harsh and negative and pessimistic and vile. I mean, I remember going on runs with some of my teammates, and the things that they would talk about were absolutely atrocious. But then what was crazy is that I would hear the coaches speaking negatively and pessimistically, and they would say horrible, horrible things as well. And so I learned really quick that it stemmed from the top down, and that the coach set the precedence of that entire team dynamic. And because of that, his shadow cast over the team caused this team to be mediocre and evil. And what's crazy is eventually his shadow caught up with him, and he was asked to resign. And so I look at that, and I look at the impact that one person can have on so many individuals. And then on the flip side, I ended up transferring to BYU because I just couldn't take it at Boise State anymore. And the opposite occurred at that university, and the coach there was a class act. He demanded your best, and he gave his best every single day. And because of that, the team thrived, not only in athletics, but outside of athletics as well. They were just class acts. I can't think of a single teammate that I had that was not trustworthy, that was not loyal, that was not faithful, that didn't have your back in any situation. And so that's what I hope can be the case for each and every one of us, is that we cast the shadows for good, and wherever we go, individuals feel blessed from just being around us.
Yes, kind of going along with stories about athletes. Two of my favorite athletes ever are Sydney McLaughlin and Allison Felix.
Yep.
And I think they cast such beautiful shadows. And I'll start with Sydney McLaughlin first. So I actually watched this about her the other day and I was just so inspired by it. So
She's cool.
she actually kind of explained that she lived in this, I think she actually said shadow, but she said this like shadow of kind of fear and anxiety, and that, in this during the start of her career, you know, she was really influenced by the negativity, by people, what people said and did. And, as like an athlete, like, I don't know to the extent, I never made it all the way like her, but like, racing, there are some nerves, and
Of course.
stepping on the line, is a nerve wracking experience. And there's definitely like some anxiety, associated with it because of performance. Anyways, but what she's so anyways, so in high school and the beginning of her collegiate and pro career, she kind of felt like this. And then she explained that during the summer of COVID, like 2020, what happened is she reached out to God and she found Him.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, that changed everything in her career. And now she's like this huge spokeswoman of how she dealt with this, weakness and turned it into a strength. And now she says, win or lose, I can step up to the line and know that like I'm greater than gold, that there's something out there that's greater than gold.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think
cool.
I think that's so cool that that's what she's using her influence to do. She's trying to help other people find Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, that's super cool. I think another story too is Allison Felix, and I think I just respect her a lot too, because she kind of changed women's athletics in a sense that she had a baby, and I believe that Nike wasn't going to
support her
and like help her with her contract, right? If she had her baby.
It was basically like Nike came to her and said, "We'll support you in anything," and then all of a sudden she became a mother, and they're like, "Accept that."
Right, and I'm like, that's so lame.
Yeah.
Especially because
ridiculous.
They
quickly backpedaled after she went back to the Olympics and won another gold medal.
Right, I'm like, but that's so cool. But she stood firm in, being a mom.
What mattered truly to her.
Yes, and it's. I think this is so cool because not only are these women like incredible athletes, they're also just incredible people, and they've influenced so many for good. And I just respect it so much.
No, I think that's what's so cool about these type of individuals is they aren't only casting a shadow in the athletic world; they cast a shadow in life. Sydney McLaughlin, this is her saying like, "I'm greater than gold." Perfect example that like you aren't your sport, you are more than your sport. And we've actually talked about that previously when our careers ended, and we were like, "What are we gonna do?" And then we quickly found out like, no, I'm more than just a distance runner or a mid-distance runner. And I think that's what's so astounding about this. I even think back to some of my friends in like high school. I had one friend in particular when we went to the Foot Locker Cross Country National Championship. It was my junior year. He was a senior. And this type of person was the type of person that brightens a room wherever he goes. He makes you feel like $1 million.
I love this story.
He's just a phenomenal
awesome.
individual. And after the race, we're in the Hotel del Coronado, famous hotel down in San Diego. And they take the top 40 boys in the nation and the top 40 girls, and then they leave you unsupervised after the race, which is just a recipe for disaster, if you ask me. But it caused a lot of fun. So I will say this. We were all out on the beach, and we're just having the time of our lives. And my friend was just being the entertainment for the evening, as he always was. And what happened was, I think about 5 or 6 of the guys came walking over, and they were all smoking cigars. And we just were competing in the
they're runners. I'm like,
cross-country national championship, which is the most ironic thing.
This is like your lungs, man.
You need those. And what was frustrating is he had, I think, 5 of the 7 guys beat him that were smoking cigars. And so I'm sure that wasn't like great either. But anyways, so he starts immediately kicking sand on these guys, playfully, I might add. And then he graciously says, like, why would you guys do this? You guys are such phenomenal people. Like, this is just going to destroy your life. You are so magnificent that I can't let you do this. Like, never once did he say anything derogatory about them as individuals. And I was just astounded. And so was everybody else. I mean, I think he ended up getting 2 or 3 of the guys to put the cigars down immediately. Now, he didn't get all of them, which is unfortunate. But he got a few of them. And because of that, because of his influence, right? All he had to say was like, oh my gosh, guys, like, what are you doing? You're incredible people. You're better than this. And then they're like, you know what? You're right. And that's the influence that I hope each of us can have. And I will add as well, like, be the example of my friend and do stand up when things need to be stood up for. I mean, don't just sit idly by. I mean, the rest of us just sat there. We were like, oh, I guess they're just going to smoke cigars, and then we were just all like going to leave. But like, he legit took action and like made his shadow that much like bigger, because that has since had an influence on me for years and years and years. And so I think that's what's so cool about this is like you can leave a legacy, and it can be a legacy for good and for peace, or it can be a legacy for chaos and wrongdoing. It's really up to you.
I remember this is a story I don't think I've even told you.
Mm-hmm.
So in high school, So in high school, I don't really remember what was going on, but somehow the teacher, it was like, it was so weird, but somehow the teacher, like, the concept of abortion got brought up. And the teacher was like, everyone who supports it, raise their hand. And I remember my heart dropping because the entire class raised their hand. And I remember thinking, like, shoot, I don't support this personally. Don't get me wrong, circumstances,
there are certain situations
I can, but like for the most part,
I think there's about 3.
Yeah, but morally, I just don't agree with abortion.
Yes.
Anyways, I believe in life, and I remember I was so nervous because I was like, I don't agree, but I like don't want to stand out. Like I don't want to have to raise my hand saying that I don't support it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like 15, right? And it was like a mixed class of like seniors and everything. And of course I'm 15 and I think this is so crazy. And then the teacher asked the question like, well, who doesn't support it? And I just like didn't raise my hand, but I remember, and it's like so embarrassing now because I totally would have, but I remember one of my friends raised his hand. And he was the only one in this room of like 40 students. And I was like, and then I felt so dumb because I was like, dang it, like I knew what I believed in, but I didn't stand for it. But I don't know, I just was really impressed by him because you know that feeling in class when every head turns to you?
Of course.
That's exactly what happened to him. And he just like
owned it.
He just owned it and raised his hand. And anyways, I just thought it was pretty cool because he just so firmly believed in that, and he then influenced my life, but probably a lot of kids in there too who probably were just raising their hand because the majority was, yeah. Right? Anyways, cool story.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I honestly think that's where we're going to end because that prefaces what we're trying to reiterate here and just illustrate here is the fact that you have an influence. Sorry about that. We had a bit of a technical difficulty.
Yes, we did.
So where I'm going to end is the fact that you have an influence for good or bad on wherever you go with whoever you interact with.
Yes, so make sure that your shadows are full of rainbows and sparkles and sunshine and fireworks and flowers and all the good things, and not full of dark and clouds and poopy poop and all the bad.
Yep.
Yeah.
So until next time, do that.
Yeah.
Please subscribe. Please do all the good things. Meg will tell you in the outro as usual. So until next time, thank you so much, everybody.
Peace.